First, I'll offer a correction that yes, I have done 5-MeO DMT. I don't even know how many times. Um, but the majority of that use of 5-MeO DMT was all done in the context of working with clients in this process that I referred to as non-dual energetic therapy or non-dual energy work. I formerly worked serving people 5-MeO DMT, which is an illegal substance, but I'm not doing it anymore. And this is what I learned from it. And the result is entheogenic liberation. Like I like to say, like false humility is not one of my personality traits. Entheogenic liberation is the most comprehensive, detailed, and informed book about 5-MeO DMT and its relation to non-dual experience that exists in the world. Is to have this immediately accessible connection to the deepest levels of myself, which is also, this is where I definitely ruffle a lot of feathers where I'll tell people that, look, I'm God. And I don't mean that in the sense of, so you need to worship me and listen to what I have to say. I mean that in the very literal sense that there is only one universal consciousness and being, and it is everything that we experience within our reality, including ourselves, and that our egoic persona is just a mask, it's just a character.
Hello, everyone. Today we have a really amazing guest. Martin Ball is with us. Martin, you are, for me, a number one person in the universe as it comes to entheogens. And I was really superbly happy when I found out last week that you agreed to do a podcast with us. And before I ask you the first question, I would like to build a little bit context around it.
Okay.
Beyond the Cars is a relatively new project. We have a team stretched from Australia through Moldavia, Central Europe, and States. And this project is about celebrating life. And we also would like to celebrate our guest, celebrate you as an amazing human being. You are a PhD professor, author of many books, musician, godfather of the term God molecule, and founder of non-dual idea. And I gotta say, we were extremely lucky with this project, which we call more like mission or even creation. A really amazing person in Europe agreed to do the podcast with us for a start. He's got a TEDx on YouTube, which has like 9 million views, about dreams, about how to live beautifully. It's just wisdom, just oceans of wisdom. His name is Jacek Walkiewicz. He's also Polish. And then we started to open some other beautiful doors all over the world. And many people tell us, well, when you will have like 250,000 of subscribers, then let us know then.
Yeah.
And there are some people, we also record another podcast today in Europe with another amazing person, David Piątkowski. He's a superbly beautiful human being. Tomorrow we are recording another podcast in Australia. I would like to ask you, like from the deep of my heart, how it works that some people, you responded to us with just like 10 minutes. You felt with your heart that you want to do this conversation with us, and some people need this, verification from the level of the mind, numbers, some algorithms, things like this.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for the very warm introduction. I really appreciate that. In answer to your question, one is I'm easy. You ask me to come on, most likely I'm going to say yes. I don't come with, excuse me, I don't come with any particular expectations that you have a certain kind of audience or anything like that. I enjoy sharing what I have to share. I'm very eager to share what I have to share because I think that I do come with a rather unique perspective on a lot of topics. And so I really value any opportunity that I'm given to join in a conversation. Like I said, I don't have requirements that you've got to be at this level or anything like that. And also just personally, I don't feel that I necessarily have the clout to demand something like that. Like, well, only if you have 5 million followers. Um, I have my own podcast I've been doing for 17 years, and that gets a few hundred listens, every week or something like that for a new episode. So it's not like I'm putting out material that has millions and millions of followers. So I'm not going to demand that of anyone. And also, as we kind of talked about a little bit in leading up to actually hitting record here, is that I have been the target of a very virulent online smear campaign several years ago, and that has really impacted my ability to participate on people's platforms and podcasts, and in many areas of the internet my work has been erased. And so again, I can't really be too choosy that if somebody comes along and says, hey, I'd like to offer you an opportunity to speak, that's something that I'm gonna jump on. And again, I don't have requirements of who you are or what your audience is, that I'm always eager to talk. I've always said that I'll talk to anyone. And so this was just an opportunity to share and come on and visit with you. So, of course, I was happy to be involved. And thanks for
Well,
inviting me.
well, for me, for us as a team, you are on the top of our list, like on the top of the all global guests. I've been doing a very deep research about life for like 25 years, a lot of psychedelic experiences, also with 5-MeO DMT, and for me, I never ever heard a person who speak more beautifully about life than you. I love the energy. I found you 7 years ago with the conversation with Leo Gora on actualize.org.
Yeah.
It was fascinating conversation. Highly recommend to see that. I would love to do the podcast with Leo as well. He's also a very interesting person. But for many, many years, I talk about Martin Ball because you are the only person I came across in the research who said that you were able to free your mind from the structure of the ego. No one else said it, and no one else done it. You've done it, right? I think you've done the 5-MeO DMT. I don't know how many times, 100 times, hundreds of times, thousands of times. So your ego finally said, "I'm done," right? And you use this energetic wave of the power of this molecule to transcend all the concepts of the ego. If you would be so kind, elaborate on this, how the journey, because it was a huge process, a huge challenge, right? Enormous, you had to use enormous amount of bravery and energy to overcome that.
Yeah, I'm happy to share the story with you. I will say that it's a long and detailed story, and so I like to bring this book out. I think, when did I write this? I think that was 2014. So that's this book here, Being Infinite, an entheogenic odyssey into the limitless eternal, a memoir from ayahuasca to Zen. So I wrote this book in 2014 because many people were asking me, like, how did you learn what you learned? Like, how is it, because I speak from direct experience when I talk about the nature of reality, the nature of God, the nature of the ego, the nature of being. I'm not repeating things that I've learned elsewhere, that I'm sharing things directly from my own experience and what happened to me. And I had so many people ask me, like, well, how did you learn all this stuff? That I decided, well, I'll just write a book about the whole thing. And it really is a memoir, in that it goes back to childhood all the way up through really 2009 is where the book kind of ends, because that was the culmination of my process. But just to share a few details with you, first I'll offer a correction that, yes, I have done 5-MeO DMT. I don't even know how many times. But the majority of that use of 5-MeO DMT was all done in the context of working with clients in this process that I referred to as non-dual energetic therapy, or non-dual energy work, where I would work one-on-one with a client and I would serve them 5-MeO DMT. And while working with them, I would also be consuming 5-MeO DMT. And it's a fairly short-acting psychedelic molecule. It only lasts for about 20 to 30 minutes or so. But in doing these private one-on-one sessions with people, we would go for multiple rounds of 5-MeO DMT. So usually we would be working energetically and working with the molecule over the course of about 2 hours. And I did that starting in the summer of 2009, and then I stopped facilitating and working as a non-dual energetic practitioner in the summer of 2016. So that was about 7 years of working with people, taking a lot of 5-MeO DMT. Now,
was there any particular reason why you stopped doing that?
There were a few different reasons. Let me see if I can recount them all. One was just that this method, this modality of working with people, which was completely novel and unique. You know, again, this wasn't something that I learned somewhere. This is something that arose organically and spontaneously out of my own awakening and experience and my desire to work with others and to help them within their own process. So it was a modality that arose organically out of that. But it was extremely energetically and physically demanding. So it was really a lot of work. And usually during that time period, I would only work with one person a day because it really was very, very demanding. It was also really fascinating. And one of the ways that I describe it is that, not that I've ever been an athlete or anything like that, but for me, it kind of felt like that was my Olympics, that it was kind of an Olympic level energetic and physical event that demanded more of me than anything else I could ever possibly do. And so I did feel it was something that kind of put me into peak performance, but it was also peak demand in a sense. And so after doing that for about 7 years, I was tired. I was kind of worn out. I was like, wow, this is really intense. And also part of it is I have a son who is 11 years old now. And back when I decided to stop doing it, you know, I was only working out of my house. I was just using a room that we didn't use for anything else in our house. And, you know, my son was getting older. And it's not that I wanted to hide it from him or anything, but you know, working with 5-MeO DMT, you have people going through radical near-death experiences, these really profound archetypal, transcendent death and rebirth experiences. It's really common for people to cry a lot. It's common for people to scream. There was a lot of purging involved. And so that was another reason that my son was getting older. He's getting a little bit more aware of like, what's dad doing over in that room over there? And it's intense to bring that level of energy into the house, you know, every day. And so that was
even
another
hard
one
to
of the
imagine for me to like you said it's a very long story. I don't want to interrupt you, but I just want to tell our viewers that this is the most fascinating story I ever heard. This is the most amazing story. Which you're telling now. So.
Yeah, well, I don't mind going into all the details. Then another reason was simply convenience in the sense that 5-MeO DMT was made illegal in the United States January 11th, I think it was, of 2011. So I'd started doing this in 2009, and at that time, it was very easy to go online and order the pure molecule of 5-MeO DMT, and it'd show up in the mail. And then after it was made illegal in the United States, I was getting it from some chemical production facilities in China because they didn't care what the law was in the United States. But then in late 2015, I think it was, the laws in China changed, and suddenly it became very, very difficult to get the pure molecule of 5-MeO DMT. And this is also around the same time that a lot of people who were working with this molecule switched over to using the Sonoran Desert toad and its secretions, which also contain 5-MeO DMT, because it became much easier to get toad secretions than the pure molecule of 5-MeO. So that was one of the reasons where I just didn't even know, like, where am I going to get a new supply of 5-MeO DMT? Plus, I'm a little bit tired, a little bit worn out. My son's getting older. It's really intense to be bringing this into the household. And another very important factor is that during this time period when I had been working with people, I felt that I had really been learning. I mean, this was like graduate school for understanding how does the human ego work? How does it become transcended? How does it let go? How does it resist? How does it hold on? How does it fight? How does it sublimate? How does it project? How does it try and transfer from one area to another? Because working with 5-MeO DMT, you have the potential to completely dissolve the human ego and move into a transcendent non-dual state. And so in doing all this work energetically with people, and again, taking 5-MeO DMT with them, which really allowed me to monitor their state and experience at a very deep and intuitive level, that I was learning all these different ways, because every different person has their own unique ego. Now, the ego is the same thing in every person. It's just a collection of energetic patterns with which we identify and express ourselves. And it's something that's very much embodied in our physical body that creates the impression of a character that we are performing as. And in working with people in this modality, I kind of learned all the ins and outs of the human ego and how it works. And I had hit a point where I felt like, even though every person is unique, I felt like I had really seen all the major themes of how the ego works and how it can be transcended. So at that point, what I really felt more inspired to do, rather than continue working with people, is I felt more inspired to start sharing really what I had learned from doing this work. And so in allowing myself to retire, that was kind of the internal permission that I needed then to write this book. I'll put this one up front, which is Entheogenic Liberation,
I think it's
Unraveling
your
the...
bestseller, right? It's your
Yeah,
best-selling book.
yeah, this has been my best-selling book ever since I produced it in 2017. It's Unraveling the Enigma of Non-Duality with 5-MeO DMT Energetic Therapy. And so this is where I took everything that I had learned and put it into book form so that I could communicate and share about it. And also, it was a legal question where I wanted to say in writing this book, I formerly worked serving people 5-MeO DMT, which is an illegal substance, but I'm not doing it anymore. And this is what I learned from it. And the result is entheogenic liberation. Like I like to say, like, false humility is not one of my personality traits. Entheogenic Liberation is the most comprehensive, detailed, and informed book about 5-MeO DMT and its relation to non-dual experience that exists in the world. So I really do consider it to be the premier book about 5-MeO DMT. And that's what I wanted to share. And I didn't feel comfortable really sharing about that if it was something that I was still doing, because there's always the threat that the authorities are going to come knocking on your door and say, hey, you're some kind of drug dealer or deviant or something like that. So I wanted to say it was something in the past and not something that I was currently doing. So all of that is just the preface to say that my own personal transformative work with 5-MeO DMT, that started in January of 2008, which initiated a whole cascade of what I now call an energetic recalibration within my being, where every month or once every 2 months, I went back to this temple called the Temple of Awakening Divinity, where I was served 5-MeO DMT. And I also started attending the local Santo Daime Church, which is an ayahuasca church here in Ashland, Oregon. And I went there 2 to 3 times a month. And then usually with each of those ceremonies, we were drinking ayahuasca anywhere from 3 to 5 times in each ceremony. So over the course of January 2008 up until the spring of 2009, I had maybe 10 or 12 full release experiences with 5-MeO DMT, lots of ayahuasca, which for me was mainly I would characterize as energetic processing and reconditioning. I did some work with Salvia divinorum during that time, also a little bit of work with psilocybin mushrooms, but it was all just moving from one stage to the next, one stage to the next. It was this whole process which completely transformed my sense of self, my sense of the nature of reality, and it reached a very definitive conclusion in the spring of 2009, where I did one last rather large dose of 5-MeO DMT. And after that, essentially, at that point, I had really freed myself from my ego, which is not to mean that I killed my ego or got rid of it or that it doesn't exist anymore, because it definitely does still exist. I'm using it right now and speaking with you. But at that point, I became kind of permanently freed from it, where for the next 3 months, at that point, it was like I was tripping 5-MeO DMT at various levels for the
Wow.
entire time period of the next 3 months. And
Do you
so,
remember how large was that dose by chance?
well, I didn't have a precise measurement of it, but just eyeballing it, it probably was enough for 2 large doses or at least 3 medium-sized doses. And I took the whole thing at once. And it, I will tell you, it was scary that my wife thought like, oh God, he's going to overdose and die. Like, this is it. I'm never going to see him again. And even I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. Again, it's a long, complex story, so I'm not sharing all the details of why I did that, which I can get into, but it's a long, complex story. But I ended up doing that, and instantly upon taking the hit, I just started laughing. And then I kind of blurted out verbally, I said, you and I both know it's going to take a lot more than that. And you can hear, even in me communicating that to you, I'm using what I have called the voice, because this is the way I speak when I'm not using the Martin persona. This is my true voice. This is the voice of how I sound when I'm not confined by the energetic constructs that is the character of Martin. So when I'm speaking as Martin, I have a bit higher register in the way that I speak. I'm a bit more casual. But this other level of myself is a much deeper level of myself. And basically, I was working on freeing that level of myself. And now that level is immediately available. When I started this process, it was only available at a high dose of psychedelics. But now it's just immediately available, that there's no longer a distinction between taking psychedelics and not taking psychedelics. And that the construct of the Martin persona, I put it on, I take it off, I set it aside, it comes back. And actually, it's not even quote unquote I doing that. It's just the nature of the energy that happens to be moving through me at any given moment. So I'm just very available to that. And so that is my version of what it means to be liberated from the ego, is to have this immediately accessible connection to the deepest levels of myself, which is also, this is where I definitely ruffle a lot of feathers, where I'll tell people that, look, I'm God. And I don't mean that in the sense of, so you need to worship me and listen to what I have to say. I mean that in the very literal sense that there is only one universal consciousness and being, and it is everything that we experience within our reality, including ourselves, and that our egoic persona is just a mask. It's just a character that this universal consciousness is performing as through the vehicles of our bodies. So this body has the personality construct of Martin. And over there, it's called Robert. And everywhere else, everyone's got their own identity and their own sense of self. But there's only one universal actor that's playing all the parts simultaneously. And I know that deep within my being. I know that this is the fundamental nature of reality, and I've accepted it and trusted it. So that's what I am. And really, that's all that anybody is. We are all this one universal consciousness. And I just happen to be able to fall directly into that because of the process that I went through. And so I'm just very clear about it. So I'm not putting it out there as an ego statement or something like that, or to try and make people think of me in a particular way. It's just reality. So I like to say that I also serve as a reality coach, and that I just want to tell people how it is and help people center into their own sense of this reality of the non-dual nature of the self. So anyway, those are some aspects of the story, but I haven't gotten into all the many details. But thanks for asking.
Yeah, this is really fascinating story, and it's probably it will be a huge challenge to describe with words how it feels in the non-dual state, right? That'd be a huge challenge for people who didn't experience that state using the 5-MeO molecule, right?
Yeah, and I'm happy to put that into words if you like. Um,
If you could refer to people who have no idea what we're talking about, because
yeah.
there'd be a lot of viewers like this, and people who are already very advanced psychonauts.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. More than happy to. Um, so this is one of the areas where I'm kind of a specialist around what is non-duality. And back when all this happened to me in 2008 and 2009, non-duality was almost never, I mean, the word itself was not used in connection to psychedelic experience. It wasn't really part of the vocabulary that was out there within psychedelic culture. And in some ways, I'm one of the people who's very responsible for why people now talk about non-duality and non-dual states in reference to psychedelic experiences, because I kind of started preaching about it in a sense on my podcast and in my books, and really making a point of using this terminology. So we can start with duality, because non-duality is not duality. So it's one of these things that's defined by what it's not, which is kind of interesting use of language, but I like it. So duality, there's all different kinds of duality. For example, within our thought processes, we tend to think in terms of twos. In other words, I like this, I don't like that. I want this, I don't want that. I love this, I hate that. I believe this, I don't believe that. So there's a lot of duality within our thought processes where we divide things in either to column A or column B, okay? Also within ethics and morality, almost always function as a dualistic system where we say these behaviors and choices are good and right and holy and righteous versus these other behaviors, these are bad, these are sinful, these are wrong, these are evil. Then in terms of categorizing experience or things we perceive, we can say, well, there's light and there's dark. There's day and there's night. There's birth and there's death. There's summer and there's winter. There, all of these quote unquote dualities or sets of opposites. Now, when we're talking at the ontological level, which means the nature of that which is, that all of our experience of reality tends to be filtered through a dualistic lens. So here's where we're getting into the nature of the ego, where I perceive of myself as I am the person, Martin Ball, and the limits of me are right here at my physical body. So there's me, and then there's everything else that exists within reality. So there's me and not me. This is a real basic fundamental distinction of the ego, where it says, this part is me, all these other things are not me. And within the not me side of things, we have other people, other living beings, and we have the objects of perception, and we have the experiences that we experience. So duality is very much a part of the normal human lived experience. And notice that all of these dualities actually are products of the human ego, because it's the human ego that reflects on the nature of experience, and it identifies subjects and objects, and it identifies what it thinks is good versus what it thinks is bad, what it wants, what it doesn't want, what is me, what is not me. So this is one of the main things that I like to say about the human ego, that often when we use the word ego, people think, oh, the ego is just your sense of yourself, of who it is that you think that you are. And I say, that's actually only one side of the ego. So the ego creates the sense of me as a individual unit that exists within reality, but the ego also categorizes everything that it perceives as being outside the self as well. So my ego says, this is me talking on a microphone on the computer to Robert, and we are recording a podcast right now. All of that is the ego. So for example, my dog, we can't see her, she's over on the couch over there. My dog doesn't have an ego that is self-referential like this and doesn't categorize the world into objects and things that are good or bad or right or wrong in the same way that we do as human beings, because she doesn't have a human ego. So the human ego is this really sophisticated function within consciousness that human beings have that organizes their whole sense of what's real and what's not real and how reality exists. So all of that is duality. Me, not me. Subject, object. And then again, dividing things into right, wrong, good, bad, all the rest of that. Then religiously, a lot of religions promote ideas of duality. For example, religions that promote various moral and ethical systems, they have ethical duality. Religions that say that God is the transcendent creator of the universe and exists apart from creation, that's a dualistic metaphysical religious system. Or a religion that says some divine savior is going to come in and swoop you up and save you from sin or the wickedness of the world, that's also a dualistic metaphysics, because it's saying that there's some agent that can come in from outside and is separate from that. So within like Christian theological language, God is transcendent. God transcends creation and exists apart and outside of that. And that's a metaphysical proposition that we can find in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. So the three Western monotheistic traditions all share pretty much the same metaphysical dualistic view. So on the other side of things, we have this term of non-duality, which means not that. It's not duality. So it's something different.
And like 99% of people, I think, of our community, I mean, humanity, have no idea what non-duality is, right? Would you agree to that? That it's a still huge number?
Yeah.
There's a very small, maybe 1% of people on this planet and in this universe heard or experienced the non-dual state?
Yeah, so definitely more people have heard of non-duality than really understand it, and certainly then have experienced it directly. And so the direct non-dual experience is extremely, extraordinarily rare. Now, there have been various non-dual religious traditions that have been around for a long time. So within Hinduism, there is the Advaita Vedanta school of the interpretation of the Vedas, these ancient Hindu holy texts. And there, Advaita in Sanskrit actually means non-dual. So in Sanskrit, if you put an A in front of a word, that means not or non, and Dvaita is the Sanskrit word for dual or duality. So Advaita means non-dual interpretation of the Vedas. So they've been around for a while. And also this idea of non-duality has been very present within many different forms of Buddhism, but not in all forms of Buddhism. So there have been teachings about non-duality around for thousands of years within human societies, but it's been very rare, for example, in European cultures and European societies, that we really don't find much of it there. So a little bit from India. There are some kind of non-dual interpretations of Taoism, but they wouldn't have used the word non-duality. And also there are kind of some contemporary non-dual teachers who are not necessarily coming out of any particular religious or spiritual tradition, and usually I think they're probably based off of their own experiences that they might have had. So having my PhD in religious studies, I was someone that I considered myself to be somewhat of a philosophical non-dualist, meaning that I had studied a lot of Buddhism, and philosophically I was like, well, I kind of think maybe it's all one. I think so. That seems right. And I don't believe in a transcendent creator God, some being that exists outside of reality and says, yes, let there be light, let there be day, let there be night. Like, no, that doesn't make any sense to me of something that exists outside and beyond. But when I had my first non-dual experience on 5-MeO DMT, what I realized from that experience is that I had only had ideas about it. And all ideas, this is where we get into one of these ironic paradoxes, is that all ideas actually are products of the ego. Because again, it's the ego that organizes our thoughts and sense of reality into this, that, or something else. That all of these thoughts actually are products of the ego. Like again, my dog does not have an ego. She is not conceptualizing reality. She is just experiencing reality and reacting to it. But the human ego, because the human ego can ask, what's this? Who am I? What's going on? Who's in charge? What's the nature of reality? And so the ego allows us to ask those questions, and then it invents answers to those questions. And that's really where all religion comes from. Is all religion is a product of the ego asking these questions and inventing answers for it. So all of my ideas about non-duality were just ideas. They were products of my ego. I couldn't really understand it because I hadn't really experienced it. So the non-dual experience where you transcend the apparent divide between self and other. You transcend the divide between me and not me. What you think is yourself versus what you think is not yourself. In that experience, the way that it unfolds in the experience of 5-MeO DMT is that there is this incredible sense of expansion of energy that quickly goes from 0 to infinity. And as this energy is expanding, all perception of subject-object relationship is dissolving. So in other words, you might have your eyes wide open, and like if I were to do it right here, right now, I would lose sight of the computer. I would lose sight of the microphone. And I would lose the sense of where the limits of my body, and I would lose my sense of self as Martin. So the initial onset of the experience, the ego thinks it's dying. It's thinking like, oh my God, this is it. Like I am letting go of everything, and I am dying and dissolving. And so in that very rapid process, everything that you think that you are and everything that you think that you aren't, it all dissolves away very, very quickly. And what you are left with is this profound sense of infinite, eternal being that is made of, the best way to describe it is the pure energy of unconditional love. And this is a unitary being and consciousness that is infinite and eternal. And that is our true nature. So the shorthand word that I use for that is that's God. This is not a transcendent God. This is not even a moralizing God. This is not a God that makes up rules and 10 commandments and you're condemned for this and you're rewarded for that. That's all mythological make-believe that the human ego has created and codified in human religions. This is just the unitary being and consciousness that is everyone and everything, and it is a being of energy, and that's all that we ever experience in reality is various spectrums and permutations and forms of energy. That's it. And so this energy coalesces into my body that makes me think, oh, I'm this person, I'm over here, and you're that person, you're over there. But it's this one universal consciousness that is all of these things. So in that non-dual state, there's no subject, there's no object, there's no world, there's no self in that world. It's just the totality of everything all at once, eternally, forever. And that is the fundamental nature of being. And that is what is performing through the structure of our bodies and through the structures of our ego as these individuated selves. So for me, that's what the non-dual experience is this transcending the artificial divide of subject and object and the identification of the human ego into this infinite state of energetic liberation and freedom that is unitary and conscious in nature. And I always like to say that for anybody who actually has this experience, it's obvious that this is what is fundamentally true, that this is what the nature of reality actually is, and we're just mostly experiencing it through these dualistic lenses, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with living in duality. It actually, if we weren't living in duality, there's no reason for me to get on the microphone and talk to you and have this conversation, because it's all just one and there's no microphone and there's nobody to talk to. So duality, it's not that it's bad or wrong. It's just that we, through the evolution of the construct of the human ego, we fundamentally don't know who and what we actually are at the most absolute level. And so I do see this as kind of the evolution of consciousness, like this transcendent experience. If everybody were to have it, it actually would be an evolutionary feature of consciousness where we could then have the authority to let go of our religious and spiritual traditions, which, as I've said, that they're all just products of the ego anyway, so that this is a profoundly liberating kind of experience. But just having the experience doesn't produce liberation. That is, to use the words I used earlier, that's an energetic reformatting and recalibration process that you have to undergo, because the ego is incredibly resilient as a set of energetic structures, and it wants to keep recreating itself. And a lot of it functions unconsciously. So it's a process to unwind and liberate from that. And so, yes, going back to your question, most people have never had this experience. And, it's understandable that we haven't, because the ego is really persistent and it's really resilient. And within the world of psychedelics, most psychedelic experiences still function dualistically. In other words, they do not dissolve the ego. Even a lot of experiences that people like to call ego death experiences on psychedelics, they're not ego death experiences. They're not transcending the ego. They're going into a projected dualistic state. So one of the things that I was saying about 5-MeO back in 2008, as I was having these experiences, is I would say, this is the only psychedelic that I know of that actually gives access to a non-dual experience really reliably. And it does it in such a profound and reliable way that, like, if we want to call DMT the spirit molecule, then we really got to call this thing the God molecule, because it's opening us up to this level of experience of ourselves as this unitary, infinite being and consciousness. In other words, we are all God, and that's what this molecule does.
Thank you for this beautiful, complex answer to that question. I love the way you structure words, because those are very advanced topics. And we have a person on board of Beyond the Courage project creation, an amazing woman. I met her recently, and we decided to do this together. Her name is Grace Love, and she experienced what you call non-dual experience organically. She was at the Tony Robbins retreat, and just pushed her, to that state. We'll be probably recording podcast one day with her as well to share this story. But she's the only person on this planet who I found who didn't need the 5-MeO molecule to do this. When I was preparing to the podcast with you, I found that myself, I've done 5-MeO, the Cenorian Desert, a couple times. And I didn't get through. It was too weak for me. My ego was able to dismount it, and I just found out during the research, listening to your other conversations, that you have to use really a large amount of synthetic version to use this energetic wave to deconstruct those ego. How you said ego is very devious and could be very tricky. I I would like to ask you because, like a year ago, a new molecule was introduced to the world. It's called 5-MeO malt, and a lot of people call it the female version of 5-MeO DMT. It's way more gentle, and it takes much longer, about 2-3 hours. And people describe that you can work with it like with the laser beams between your mind and some aspects of your life, and you can transcend a lot of. It's not that like it doesn't happen that fast. It's just a completely different molecule. Way more. Some people call it way more friendly. Because the 5-MeO DMT, it works like it just takes less than seconds to everything goes online, and ego says, "What the hell is this?" And it's dissolving because it's happening faster than the ego can perceive reality, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have some experiences or some thoughts about the 5-MeO malt?
Yeah, I have no personal experience with it. I've definitely heard about it. I've heard people say, yeah, it's kind of this gentler, slower experience. Again, I haven't tried it myself personally, so this is not coming from any kind of personal assessment. I am a little bit skeptical because, for example, with 5-MeO DMT, if you're working with the pure molecule, meaning not from the Sonoran Desert toad, that there are other avenues through which you can experience it. For example, so mostly people are working with it, vaporizing it or smoking it, mostly vaporizing it. And there, the onset is incredibly rapid. I mean, literally, before you've got the hit all the way in, there's that sense of, oh shit, I've done it now. Like everything's becoming infinite, like even before you're exhaling. So it's very rapid. But with the pure molecule, you can also snort it. So you can go up the nose. You can plug it, which would be going anally. And you can also do an IV or intramuscular application of it. Now, I've tried snorting it. I'm not necessarily a big fan of snorting stuff. But what I often find with reports from people who are using these other modalities, where if you're snorting it, plugging it, or doing an IV, it's not coming on as rapidly. The peak isn't as intense, and the duration tends to be a bit longer. But what a lot of people report from that is that they don't feel that they actually, quote unquote, went all the way into the completely transcendent non-dual state. And I do think that because the human ego is so resilient that it can constantly reconfigure. So the more time we give it with any given molecule, the more it learns like, oh, here's how I can hold on. Here's how I can not dissolve all the way. Here's how I can retain a residual sense of myself. So when people describe 5-MeO MALT as being slower and gentler and longer lasting, it makes me think, well, then it might not actually get you as far as 5-MeO DMT can get you, because it's actually the pulling the proverbial rug out from underneath the ego with 5-MeO DMT that I think is what helps it be so effective to achieve these non-dual states and experiences. But with that said, I'm open. I haven't tried it, so I can't say with any kind of authority whether that is the case with the 5-MeO MALT or not. But also just to reference back to, there are the secretions of the Sonoran Desert toad, and here this can be a bit tricky to work with. It does contain 5-MeO DMT, but of course every batch of toad secretions is going to have a different concentration and ratio of 5-MeO DMT in it. And definitely people do report having full non-dual experiences with the toad secretions. But I do think it's a little bit less reliable than just working with the pure molecule, where it's much easier to determine this is the dosage, this is the level that I'm going for. And with the toad secretions, you need to use a lot of that to get a comparable dose to a very small amount of the pure molecule. So it requires a lot more inhaling. It's just, I think it's a little bit trickier to work with. And it also does have a lot of other molecules in that as well. And so there's just more going on with that. That for me personally, the pure molecule, this made in a lab, the synthetic molecule, for me is just cleaner, easier to work with, and more reliable than toad secretions. But there's lots of people out there who are, definitely on the toad secretion side. I'm not one of them. I've experienced the toad secretions. I think it's fine. I don't think it's all that different from the pure molecule of 5-MeO, but I think it's just easier to work with the pure molecule. And you're taking much less, like 15 milligrams of the pure molecule in a vaporizer. You hardly even notice that at all as you're taking that in, and that is a sufficient dose in most instances. But with toad secretions, you need to use like 100 milligrams of toad secretions, and that's producing a lot of vapor, and you really have to take in a huge hit, and sometimes that's just challenging for people. So a lot of people who work with toad, they have people do these breathing exercises beforehand and make them like lift their arms up and all this stuff that to me like seems a little bit silly, like, because if you're working with a pure molecule, you just take a little hit and it's like bam, there you go. So it's just a lot easier to work with, in my opinion.
Okay, just a small disclaimer here. We are just talking about it for the educational purposes.
Yes.
We don't encourage anyone to do those experiences. Please do a lot of research. In many areas in the world, 5-MeO DMT is already legal. There's a lot of retreat centers. Has there been a decriminalization of the 5-MeO in Oregon? Because Oregon is like a pioneering state of decriminalizing and legalizing.
So a couple of years ago, we had a ballot measure that decriminalized most substances in Oregon. And decriminalization, I mean, it's always important to distinguish that decriminalization is not legalization, that these are two different legal categories. So legalization would be you could buy it, you can sell it, you can use it, there's no problem because it's legal, it's not illegal. Decriminalization merely says these things are still illegal and they're going to be the lowest possible priority for the police and the authorities, so that if you are caught with any of this in your possession, probably it's just going to be confiscated and the police aren't going to do anything more. They're not going to put you in jail. They're not going to, it's not going to go on your record or something like that. And the idea in Oregon was that we were going to decriminalize pretty much all drugs. And then the money that was being spent to police people's drug use was going to be diverted to drug treatment programs. But apparently the money didn't go through. And so now we've actually experienced, because, like in many places in the United States, I mean, psychedelics are not the problem. I mean, they've never been the problem. The problem are opiates and drugs that people actually get really destructively addicted to. And there's huge problems with meth and fentanyl here in Oregon. And so previously, meth and fentanyl users, they were being rounded up and put in prison, and they weren't on the streets. And now they're not being put on prison, so they're in the streets and they're homeless and they're not getting access to any kind of treatment. So that actually has been rescinded in Oregon, and they're going to recriminalize everything. So at the legal level, what we have here in Oregon, first of all, back in the 1990s, Oregon, the state of Oregon, said, regardless of your race and ancestry, anyone can participate in the Native American church and eat peyote, which contains mescaline, which is an illegal drug. And that was in response to a court case that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And then in 2009, the local ayahuasca church that I was attending, the Santo Daime Church, they took the federal government to court saying, we want federal religious freedom protections to serve ayahuasca in our religious ceremonies. And they won their court case, but that only applies to the Santo Daime churches. It doesn't apply to the shamanic ayahuasca ceremonies that happen here in Oregon. And now also we have what's called the Psilocybin Assisted Services Initiative, where there are trained and licensed psilocybin facilitators who can work with clients in a therapeutic and clinical context to give people psilocybin experiences as the idea is part of their treatment for depression or PTSD or anxiety or addictions, whatever it is that they may have. But it's a rather expensive program. It does cost thousands of dollars to have these kinds of experiences. And here in Ashland, there are a number of different centers now that you can go to and have a legal psilocybin experience. But that's where we're at the legal level currently. So 5-MeO DMT at this point would still be considered illegal, and you could still get busted for using it or having it in the state of Oregon.
Okay, thank you for the wide explanation.
Yeah.
And do you have any experiences of or knowledge with ibogaine?
Yeah, ibogaine and ibogaine.
Ibogaine. Yeah, some people call it ibogaine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I only have a little bit of personal experience with it, and that came about in 2019. I developed a really dramatic chronic sleep disorder. And this actually had been something that I've had trouble sleeping my entire life, like going back to infancy and childhood. And it's something that my entire life I've always just pushed through. And I've had the energy and the stamina to push through the fact that I don't sleep well. But in 2019, I completely lost the ability to sleep for 10 consecutive days. And it had been declining really severely throughout 2018. And one of the proposed treatments for my sleep disorder was that a few different doctors who know about iboga and ibogaine suggested that I try microdosing ibogaine for a number of weeks. No, excuse me, microdosing iboga, the actual plant root, not the extracted molecule. So I did that for a number of weeks. And that was just microdoses. So that's a far, far cry from like a full flood dose. And it has been something that I've really wanted to experience. But currently, I use a variety of different supplements, and I do have a prescription to help with sleep, which helps a little bit. And unfortunately, it doesn't help all that great. So I still really have a lot of trouble with my sleep. Where I've wanted to go for a full flood dose of iboga, but this medication that I use nightly to sleep is contraindicated in use with iboga, and I would need to be off of this medication for 9 days in order to safely do the iboga, but it's a medication that I use every night to help sleep. So I'm kind of boxed into where I can't at this point.
Gotcha.
So mostly my experience with iboga and ibogaine comes from I've interviewed a number of people on my podcast about iboga and ibogaine. I actually have another one coming up on Monday of someone in Oregon who has opened up an iboga church here in Oregon. And then these days I work as a non-dual integration coach. So people come to me with their entheogenic experiences and want help reflecting on them from this non-dual and energetic perspective. And there I have definitely worked with a number of clients who have experience with iboga and ibogaine. So I'm very familiar with it at sort of the descriptive level, that I'm familiar with how people describe their experiences and what it's like for them. And I do feel that I'm able to offer useful insight into what they're describing of their experiences, but I don't have the personal experience of the full flood dose. We're talking like the 72 hours of iboga experience. That's something I've not experienced, but I definitely hope to someday. And I'm hopeful that it might even provide some insights into what this sleep disorder really is, because it actually puts you into like an REM state for an extended period of time. So your brain waves on iboga kind of match your dreaming brain waves, is my understanding, and it makes it so that you don't sleep for several days. And then some people actually say that after that 3-day time period that they start sleeping better than they've ever slept in their life. And so I was like, that sounds really appealing to me, but just
It is,
medically,
yeah.
I can't do that yet.
It's calling me very heavy. Iboga is calling me I'm preparing myself to experience that because there's so many things within us. I heard that it can completely reset our nervous system to any moment of our life where we felt like we've helped many addictions and many other traumas. And this is extremely efficient.
Yeah.
We would like to explore this Iboga experience molecule on the podcast as well. Maybe you can refer us some really interesting, fascinating person who we may invite to the podcast.
Yeah. And, just at the descriptive level, Iboga and ibogaine are almost the complete opposite of 5-MeO DMT in the sense that it tends to function highly dualistically, in the sense that it doesn't dissolve your sense of egoic self, but what it does is it takes your egoic sense of self and keeps putting it into context of, here's the time that you got traumatized. Here's the time that you got addicted. Here's the time that you were mean to your mom, right? That people often describe it as like showing little picture windows onto their life of different events that happened to them. So it doesn't dissolve the subject-object barrier. It actually reinforces it in some way that says, well, here's the story of your life. Here's where you got lost. Here's where you got traumatized. And then in terms of pharmacology, it's a very complex tryptamine that interacts with lots of different receptor sites on the brain. And so all of our traumas and our addictions and our infirmities, they're encoded within our brainwave patterns and within our neural networks. So it gets in there and it actually reorganizes all of this stuff. And that's why people who might have a really debilitating addiction, they can come out of their ibogaine experience and say, you know what, not only do I not feel addicted, but I don't feel, I don't have any cravings. I don't have any desire to go back to it. So it actually does allow this really profound reset. And it does it at the same time that it's showing you the behaviors that created the imbalance that drove you into addiction or pathological behavior, or whatever that may be. So it's a very sophisticated psychedelic experience. But it's all through this lens of duality, of me and the people I've done things to in my life, or me and the substances I've taken. So it really looks at the story of your life and kind of cleans it up. Whereas 5-MeO DMT says, your story is just a story. We're going all the way beyond that into the fundamental nature of reality. So they're kind of opposite ends of the spectrum, which I think is fascinating. Because again, there's nothing wrong with duality. That's how we're navigating 99.99% of all of our experiences. So it's good to have a clear, well-functioning duality.
Isn't it amazing that we have tools like this, like Iboga and 5-MeO DMT, and most of the mainstream culture haven't even heard about those tools? And I heard that in the near future, hundreds and hundreds of new psychedelics will be introduced to our world. Many people are anticipating that it will happen. Not like maybe 2 or 5 more, but hundreds of them.
Yeah, yeah.
Would you agree to that?
Yeah, I mean, we have 2 basic categories of these psychedelic entheogenic tools and molecules. One category is those that come from natural sources. So we're having a big thunderstorm outside right now. I'm just hoping it doesn't turn the power off or, cause any transmission.
I was googling. Have you ever heard about celandine? Celandine. It's a herb. Because you refer to this problem with sleeping. I know the guy in Europe who is doing a lot of out-of-body experiences. You're probably familiar with those, right?
Yeah.
And he had a huge problem with sleeping as well, and he used this herb to It was the only herb on this planet which helped him with the
Well,
sleep.
I'll have to look it up. One of the things I'm using right now is actually an Amanita muscara extract. So the Amanita mushroom is, sort of the classic red and white polka dot large mushroom, and it
Yeah.
produces this molecule called muscimol. And that actually is one of the few things I've experienced that produces genuine sleepy feelings. So I take this extract right as I'm going to bed, and within like 20 or 30 minutes, I start to get these waves of like, oh, that feels nice. It feels like I'm going to go to sleep, because this is something that my body, for whatever reason, my body will not do it naturally on its own at this point. That my body will not produce that sense of, oh, I'm going to go to sleep now. That I can literally stay up forever. That because my body is just not going to do it. And the Amanita extract definitely helps. But so that's within the category that I was saying, that we have natural psychedelic compounds. So these comes from different plants, herbs, mushrooms, various seeds, and we have like the secretions of the Sonoran desert toad. There's also a few lichens that have been found to contain psilocybin and 5-MeO DMT. So we have these various sources of these plants and fungi around the world that produce these natural psychedelic tryptamines and phenethylamines. And then we even have ones that actually are more poison and toxins. And so that's like the Solanaceae family. That would be like Datura, nightshade, all the plants in those families that produce toxins. Where, see, most psychedelics, they're non-toxic. But this particular category of psychedelic molecules, they are toxic, where if you take too much of them, they will, at the very least, they will poison your body and create brain damage. And at the worst, they can actually kill you if you take too much of them. So they're very, very dangerous. But things like psychedelic mushrooms, like psilocybin mushrooms, they're essentially non-toxic, that it's not even possible for you to eat enough to reach a toxic level with them. And then we have the synthetic psychedelics, and a lot of these are replications of psychedelic molecules that are found in various plants and fungi around the world. So, for example, you can find 5-MeO DMT in a few plants in the Sonoran desert toad. And there, as I mentioned, there's a lichen that contains 5-MeO DMT, or you can make it in a lab, and then it's just the pure molecule. And it's the exact same thing. There's no fundamental difference between a molecule made in nature or made in a lab. And then we have the work of some, pioneering chemists, such as like Sasha Shulgin, who did a lot of tinkering with the molecular structure of various phenethylamines and tryptamines. And he was able to basically invent a large number of novel psychedelic compounds. And now this is something that many different research institutes and chemical companies are looking at, because now that we're getting a lot of data that psychedelics can help with a variety of different mental and emotional issues, and possibly even physical ailments, such as Alzheimer's, dementia, cluster headaches, migraine headaches, not to mention PTSD, anxiety, depression, lots of different mental and physical disorders that lots of companies and research institutes are looking to develop new psychedelic molecules that might be easier to take. Definitely taking psychedelics can be challenging. They're often scary, they're unpredictable, and there's even some places that are looking to produce molecules that are derived from psychedelics that don't have psychedelic effects, but still might be able to treat things like depression or anxiety. So these are all in development, and the chemical formulas for making them have already been established, a lot of them by Sasha Shulgin. And so there's the potential to just kind of keep making even more and more and more, because they're just these little molecular puzzle pieces, right? That you can use the base structure And then you can add something here and take something else here and kind of move this one over to here, move that over there. And sometimes you get psychedelic effects and sometimes you don't. And really the only way to know is like you have to try them. So that's called bioassaying, where it's like, okay, we've got a new molecule. We don't know what it does. Let's ingest it, see what happens. And that's also what Sasha Shulgin was doing, was every time he made a new molecule, he documented taking a small dose and then slowly going up the scale and finding when and where does this become psychedelic, and then what is that experience like. So yeah, there's a potential for maybe even an infinite number of new psychedelic compounds to be developed. And you know, sometimes in the psychedelic community, people like to make a big deal of, well, this one comes from nature, so I trust and want that, versus this one comes from a lab, so I don't like that. And that's just playing into the dualistic constructs of the ego that's saying this is good, that's bad, this is nature, this is not nature. That I like to say that human beings are nature. Everything that human beings create is also nature. We are all parts of reality are God experiencing itself as that thing. And therefore everything that exists within reality is natural and is a direct expression of the unitary being that is God. So I don't make these distinctions between this one's natural, this one's synthetic, this one's good, this one's bad. I think that that's just silly, and it just reinforces artificial divides of the ego, in my opinion.
Yeah, I have the same view, that there's everything is natural. And what do you think is the purpose of the ego? Like, is it a tool for evolution? Many people, people like Eckhart Tolle, communicate right now that it's time to slowly go away from ego, that we should collectively start a process of dissolving ego because it has some purpose in the evolution. And now we have all those amazing tools to dissolve it now for 10, 15 minutes, but maybe later on the consciousness will start the process of unifying itself. You think, have you ever thought about it? Have you ever contemplated? What's the purpose of ego?
Yeah, so the way that I would put it is that definitely the ego is a evolutionary structure where when the hardware of the human brain and the software, meaning the neural network and connections in the different parts of the brain, once we reached a certain evolutionary stage, the ego developed. And this is a way for self-consciousness to come into existence within reality. And that this is part of the evolution of God in physical form. And that I do think that it is a step up from largely non-self-conscious animalistic awareness. And that, again, it's the ego that's able to ask, what is this? Who am I? What's going on? What is the nature of reality? And these are really deep and profound questions. Again, my dog is not able to ask herself these questions because she doesn't have an ego that has that self-referential awareness. So this is definitely an evolutionary step in consciousness, and it's a product of the human brain. And it's actually what allows God as a unitary being to experience itself as an individuated self within the larger matrix that is the unitary being. In other words, it produces the sense of being a character, the sense of being, I'm me that's living this life and making these choices and doing all these things, and here's my experience. So it actually allows this unitary consciousness to really invest itself in these individuated perspectives. And because we're able to ask these questions and investigate and develop answers, all human religion, society, art, politics, philosophy, music, everything that human beings create comes out of the fact that we have an ego. And so that's evolutionary speaking, that's amazing. Like the output of the human ego is absolutely astounding. And if it weren't for the human ego, we would not have these computers that we could talk to each other on. Like all technology and science is actually an outcome of us having egos. But at the evolutionary level, the problem is that we are fully identified with the ego. And because of that, it works really well. The ego works very, very well from an evolutionary perspective when we're dealing with small tribal societies that says, this is my group, this is who I identify with, this is my role within the group, this is my role within the family, these are the symbols and the myths and the meanings that we make out of the world, and here's how we can communicate and pass on our knowledge, and we can survive over time. That's necessary as human beings, as these complex social animals that we are. And then with the invention of more large-scale societies and religion, that the ego started to produce sets of beliefs and morals and rules and laws and systems of economics and governance, and that was functional. It helped us survive and grow and develop as a species. But we're at the point now where through the egoic divide, we're actually quite pathological, that we have divided ourselves into constantly us versus them, right versus wrong, good versus ego or evil, my group against your group, my beliefs against your beliefs. And we have reached the point where we can collectively destroy each other. We can collectively decimate the environment and disrupt the entire biosphere and the ability of all life to exist. And so what I like to say is that evolutionarily speaking, we're basically God toddlers. We're just like little kids that God is performing through human beings as like these little toddlers. And as we all know that toddlers, they want what they want and they want it when they want it. And if they don't get it, they're going to throw a tantrum. And human beings are basically like that because we haven't grown up. We haven't matured. So I see the transcendence of the ego is actually the next evolutionary stage in the evolution of consciousness as it is manifested through biological beings. And when we transcend the ego, we can start to become God adults. Because for example, once you've had this experience, it's really hard to identify as, well, this is my group versus your group, or this is my religion versus your religion, or this is my set of political beliefs versus somebody else's, because it becomes this grand unifying experience of like, oh my God, we're all God in human form. We're all fundamentally the same. We're all fundamentally equal. When we are all part of this same divine expression of unitary being. So this tribalism, this political divisions, these social divisions, all of this stuff, and the way that we treat the environment and other living beings, all of that is just coming out of our ego. And when we transcend our ego, it reorients how we're going to relate to what we perceive as otherness within the world. And that it allows us to grow up. And that's where, isn't it convenient that this molecule of 5-MeO DMT exists within reality? It's like the key that unlocks this next stage of conscious evolution. It's built right into reality itself. And this is where, like you mentioned, this woman who had her own spontaneous experience. It's great when people have those spontaneous experiences into the non-dual state. It's really, really rare. And even people who spend years and decades meditating, it's really rare for people to actually have this experience. And so it's like the cheat code was built into reality itself. Our biological systems react to this molecule in such a way that we can enter into the non-dual state, and it completely reorganizes our sense of self and our sense of being within reality. And so one of the ways that I see it as hopefully moving is that, for one, we continue to work with psychedelics for healing, growth, and personal transformation. These are all parts of the modern psychedelic renaissance and the therapeutic movement, and I think all of that is great. But also this is where I think that there's a special role for the non-dual experience, and 5-MeO DMT in particular, of actually bringing humanity into a transcendent state where it doesn't obliterate our individuality. It doesn't get rid of the ego, but what it does is it puts the ego in its place, where rather than saying, I am my ego, and everything I think that my ego thinks is what is reality, we're able to say, oh, my ego is just a character that the universal consciousness is performing, and it's that same consciousness is performing as everyone and everything, that actually is necessary for moving into a more harmonious state of being, where then we still get to be the individuals that we are. We're still going to have egos, but we're not going to be... Okay, one of the biggest problems with the ego is that it's a bullshit artist, that it takes something that it doesn't know and makes up a belief about it and then behaves as though that belief were real. Okay?
And judge it all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's some pathological aspects to the ego. And what happens when we transcend the ego is that it puts that into perspective where we're not bound by it anymore. And we're letting go of our beliefs, and we're letting go of the identities that divide us. So I think it's a very important step in human evolution. And I do think that it is where, quote unquote, consciousness is headed. But I always like to say that, you know, your ego is the character that you're going to be experiencing yourself as for your entire life. What you want is an ego that is functional, that is coming from a place of clarity and coming from a place of authenticity, not a place of confusion, distortion, projection, and judgment and control. So it actually provides a lot of relief for the ego. And then it's better. And then, like, the only reason we fight wars is because of egos. The only reason that we exploit natural
Exactly.
resources is because of the ego. The only reason that there is violence and racism and sexism is because of the ego. So these are some of the pathological outputs of the ego. And if we can just... Right? This is why I called the work that I was doing as like non-dual energetic therapy. If we can energetically reorganize the ego so that it's just coming from a place of clarity and authenticity, those things aren't going to happen because they're products of the toddler ego that's like, I want what I want, and I'm going to call you names, you know? That's just childish behavior. So I do have a lot of hope that humanity is ready to evolve beyond sort of the tribal ego, I think is sort of the best way to describe it, or the toddler ego.
That's so beautiful you just said. So thank you for it. That's why we call this project Beyond the Courage, because we want to go beyond, whatever it means, whatever it did us. You also put it beautifully. We call it healthy ego, right? The ego which is friendly, unified. So now we got those tools like 5-MeO DMT, 5-MeO malt, and iboga to... the question pop up to my mind: why would culture, which is probably the part of God, want to cancel you? If you are the pioneer of this slowly, of this process going away from ego, I was so shocked, you know, that however we call it, I don't know, system is trying to fight. And this $1,000,000 question pop up to my mind: does ego has its own ego? Have you ever thought about it? I know it's a very twisted question, but...
Yeah, well, we can talk about ego both at the individual level, and then there's also the collective level. And at the collective level, I like to call it the meta-ego. And the meta-ego is always susceptible to trends and values and discourse within larger society, okay? And then it gets enacted by individuals, but it's part of a larger structure of what's going on in terms of how these meta-egos are saying this is right versus this is wrong, this is what we want, this is what we don't want, this is what we're going to call good, this is what we're going to call bad, and this is what we're going to do with people that we think are bad, and this is what we're going to do with people that we think are good. And in many ways, I have operated as a pretty radical disruptor, meaning that, like in the psychedelic world, I've been extraordinarily disruptive as a voice. That I've come out and I've said, well, all this stuff about spirits and past lives and all this other stuff that people are into within the psychedelic world, it's like, I think this is all a product of the ego. And I've taken some of the cherished heroes within the psychedelic movement, such as Terence McKenna, and I've been extremely critical of him. And really what I consider just to be a lot of egoic nonsense that he's put out there. And in pressing for this non-dual interpretation, that I've challenged a lot of people's beliefs, both spiritually and religiously and also culturally. And then as functioning as a non-dual energetic practitioner, I mean, as you can imagine, just by the description, that we're not dealing with what we think is right versus what we think is wrong, that we're dealing with what is the raw energy that is present and how do we encounter that authentically and engage with that. So I've been very, very challenging to a lot of people. Like when I was going through my whole transformation process in 2008 and 2009, I got messages from people saying, "Oh, you're a fraud, you're a charlatan," and then even people saying you're possessed or you're some kind of psychopath or something like that, like really triggering people's egoic responses. And then kind of being an iconoclast and taking down some of the cherished views and heroes of the psychedelic movement, that people have reacted to that. I mean, like, oh, well, I want to make him pay for not supporting my view, and I want to, make him pay for taking down my hero. So I've always been kind of challenging for people in that way. And then as being the target of cancel culture, that all came out as sort of the Me Too movement, this whole idea of holding therapists accountable, where there have been people who have been abusive, and there have been cases where people have offered quote unquote therapy, but they've been sexually abusing people or things like that. And
about it, yeah.
in my case, no one has ever accused me of actually abusing them in any way or hurting or harming them from any of the work that they did with me in any way, shape, or form. But I have presented materials that have caused people to think like, oh, we could use this. And then see, the ego also picks up on how is language being used within the meta-ego. It's like, oh, well, let's call him a groomer, which that's a really hot word in American, socio-political systems today. Like Republicans want to say anybody who's gay, they're a groomer, or anyone who's a transvestite, they're a groomer. Anybody who puts on a drag show, they're a groomer. And what they're trying to do is like sexually abuse children. So that's a hot button word. And this whole movement towards psychedelic therapy, that has its own set of ideas, like what is ethical, what are the boundaries, how do we create consent and things like that. But this is all kind of a new development. And when I was working, none of this was part of the language. Which not to say that, wasn't concerned about those kinds of things. But I have been the target of being canceled and being shut out from psychedelic culture. I think primarily because I have been challenging and I've been very bold in what I've shared, and I'm very direct in the way that I speak, and I'm very clear when I feel that, well, that's a product of your ego versus that not a product of your ego. So I've been very challenging for people, and that sometimes I think I scare people. And also because I have been very transparent, that it's been very easy for people to take things that I've shared and then kind of distort them into their version of what a bad guy is. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot more I could say about, what happened to me and why I think it happened. There's another long, complex story there. But yeah, I've been subject to being canceled, but not because I've actually done anything that's harmful or hurtful to anyone. It's just that some people, they don't like me, and I've been an easy target in that sense. That's my opinion on it.
Well, for me, for us as a team, you are a hero. You are one of the most beautiful, intelligent, brave unit of that unified consciousness, and you have our full support. And it's very hard. I was so shocked, because when I was preparing for this podcast with you, that culture is trying to cancel you, because you the way you speak, it's so beautiful. It's a hope for humanity. It's a hope for evolution. 5-MeO DMT is the most advanced, the most energetic substance on this planet, right? There is nothing. That's the best. That's the strongest we got.
Yeah.
And at some point, the other kind of this unified consciousness is trying to cancel that. That's fascinating.
Yeah. It's a reaction of the ego, really, is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's ironic, because the people who try to cancel me, the way that they would characterize it is, oh, well, we want to hold abusive people accountable for how they abused others. And again, no one has ever accused me of abusing them in any way, shape, or form. And they also say that we want harm reduction and we want the best information. And, as I said before, like with my book, Entheogenic Liberation, and actually my books in general, that, again, false humility is not part of my personality construct, that my books and my information around non-duality and 5-MeO DMT is just, it's incomparable, that you're not going to find anything out there that comes even remotely close to the level of information that I'm presenting to people. And so I have been just a radical pioneer in this area, and that if people actually, one of the results of having been canceled is, I've produced several books since I got canceled, and I've seen people online comment like, no, I would never read a book by that guy because he's evil or whatever it is, that they've been taken in by the cancellation. And I just think what a shame that is, because you're not going to find this information anywhere else. And if you want to work with 5-MeO DMT, I would recommend you read my books. That there are a few other books out there about 5-MeO DMT. They're not comparable to mine. They just aren't. So it's actually preventing people from getting access to what I consider to be the best information available out there in the world. And so people who say that they want to protect and help people, that promoting this cancellation, it's just absurd. That, it's not like I'm saying like everybody needs to read my books, but like if you're going to work with 5-MeO, like a very common response that I get from people is either A, I'm really glad I found your books before I had 5-MeO, or I was really lost after my 5-MeO experience until I found your books or heard a talk that you gave or something like that. And I am of the opinion that I am very articulate about this. I do have the ability to speak about this at a level that you're really not going to find anywhere else. And it's a shame that so many people in the psychedelic world have kind of fallen into this cancellation thing, where it's very rare for me to be invited for interviews. It's very rare for me to be invited to give a talk or participate publicly. And then even when I do, people come along and say, oh, he's a groomer, he's an abuser, because they're just following this egoic reactionary pattern of cancellation.
Of this collective pattern.
Yeah.
I know very intelligent people who told me that your books are the most fascinating books out there about entheogens. You devoted a huge part of your life to that, right?
Yeah. And I would agree.
And surprisingly, and a lot of people do not appreciate it or do not understand it. Um, I get what this is one of the last questions. I listened to one of your conversations recorded like 2 months ago with a woman, and at the end she asked you the question: if you could choose one person globally to do the 5-MeO DMT, you said it would be Donald Trump, right?
Yeah.
Because this is how ego. These are the extremes of ego, right? Of the areas and that's what mostly needs to be cured, right? I'm not judging it. I'm just asking you a question, like.
Yeah, that really was my honest response to that. Like, just thinking in terms of the contemporary landscape in the world, like if I could pick one person to try and help to maybe produce some change, some insight, it would definitely be Donald Trump, because he is, honestly, he's like the epitome of the God toddler ego. Like, this is a man who doesn't seem to be able to think beyond the level of a 5-year-old, and he's had a global impact, and he has such a huge influence over such a large portion of the population. I think maybe if you ask people, like, if you could trip with one person, who would it be, that they might think of, like, well, who could I have the most fun with? So that would be a different way to sort of answer that question, like, who would be really enjoyable to trip with. But for me, it was, well, I would choose Trump because I actually want to produce the largest impact possible. And he would be my go-to target. And, like way back before he was president, I was tripping on MDMA. And for me, MDMA often can be very visual, where it isn't for most people. But during this trip, I was lying on my bed, listening to music, had my eyes closed, and I was having this experience of like this really long line of people who were lined up in front of me. And each one was coming up, and I was just giving them a great big hug, because it was kind of this recognition of, here are two versions of God just hugging each other. And within this line, they were all different races and all different ages. Like every kind of person imaginable you could think of was in this line. And then at the very end of the line, the second to last person was Hillary Clinton. I was kind of surprised, because I usually don't, quote unquote, see people I know or something like that. Like, no one else in this line could I have identified who they were. I was like, oh, Hillary Clinton, all right, I'll give her a hug. And that was pretty easy. And then the next person in line was Donald Trump. And I got to tell you that my own personal reaction to Donald Trump is one of revulsion, that I am deeply repelled by him as a human being. I energetically, I definitely have a problem with the fact that he lies all the time, pretty much about everything. That's very hard for me to take energetically. So my initial reaction was just like, oh my God, Donald Trump here in my vision, and he wants a hug. But then the deeper level was, and he is an expression, embodiment of God as well, and he is just as deserving as anyone of being received in unconditional love. So I gave him a hug, and then that was the end of that vision. And that's I've kind of been keeping that in my heart, in a sense, ever since he came on the political scene, because I think he's done incredible damage. And I deeply wish that he would desire to help himself at a deep level to transform into a better version of himself, because as he is, he's a narcissistic sociopath, and I think he's just incredibly damaging to the United States and incredibly damaging to the world. So I would love, it would have to be his choice, but I would love the opportunity to work with him to help heal some of these wounds that he's been living with, that has turned him into such a destructive individual.
Well, it's so beautiful that you found the strength within you, in the deeper self, that is also a part of God, and you gave him a hug.
Yeah.
That's such an amazing story. So, Michael, what are your plans? What are your dreams for now? What are your boldest dreams? What do you feel
Oh,
like at the core of essence of your heart after so many experiences, such amazing life you have?
well, I mean, honestly, with this ongoing chronic sleep disorder, I mean, that would the dream that would be at the top of my list is finding some resolution to this sleep disorder because every night is hard, every day is hard.
Mm.
Every day is uncomfortable. I am chronically sleep deprived. I wish I could get more sleep. I wish it could be more natural. I wish it could be easier. Um, for me personally, like that's the number one thing. Like if I could make a big change or like actualize some dream in my life, that would be it. Um, then beyond that, um, I do, in terms of the collective, I'm very motivated by helping people and very motivated by spreading accurate, comprehensive, detailed information about how to work with psychedelics in a really deep, transformative way and how to transform ourselves from that non-dual perspective and non-dual experience. And I just love having more opportunities to do that in my life. Um, So that's at the collective level. Back again to the personal level. I'm a really I love music. I'm a really avid musician. I love making music. I love enjoying music. So that's a big part of like what do I want more of, like more music, and this is purely personal. Okay, this has nothing to do with anything grand, but purely personal. Is um, I dream of more people actually enjoying my music. Like I don't have like a big listenership for my music or anything like that. Like um, somebody the other day asked me. Like where do I make my income? Like how do I live my life? And I said, well, basically it's from selling books and doing integration calls with clients. And he's like, what? You don't make money from music? It's like, oh no, no. I maybe make like $10 a month from music. Um, so I'd love to be able to spread my music more because I love it. Um, Other people don't love it the way I love it, but I love it, and I hope to continue throughout my life to continue to develop my skills as an artist and as a musician, as someone who likes to create. That I'm very creatively inspired, and I love working on projects. And so I hope that I will continue to find uh, projects to keep myself busy until I shuffle off
Mm.
this mortal coil, and hopefully find some resolution to my sleep disorder before that happens, because that would really make, I'm going to be turning 52 in a couple months, and time's limited, so I'd like to go through the rest of my life with as little hassle in terms of my health as possible. And I also hope that at some point this whole being canceled thing will be a part of my past and not part of my current reality. But it's still very much part of my current reality. So that's something that I hope for myself as
Mm.
well.
Uh, I heard in one of your podcasts that you have a very unique way of creating music, that you start creating a song and you have no idea what song's gonna be about. It's just about the love of creating the music, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much how most of my songs get started. I mean, there are a few different ways that I go about creating music, but I would say at least 80% of my music just comes from sitting down at the computer, either getting my keyboard or just grabbing one of my instruments and just starting. And um, for me, recording music is the process of discovering like what the song is. So it's a very much like an open journey. It's very exploratory for me, and that's why I love it
Mm.
so much. And that's also why, like, if you listen to any of my albums, most of the songs are all really different from each other. Like sometimes I try and like create an album that's like more cohesive. Like these are songs that all go together. But I'm just very open to whatever inspiration is in the moment, and I just enjoy it. Like it's fun. Of like I don't know what I'm going to come up with today, but let's sit down and let's find out. And so I'm just very open to the exploration of sound and music, and really get a kick out of it. Really enjoy it. So yeah, if I could retire and just make music and support myself, like, oh, that'd be awesome. But I'd still probably want to help people and talk to people because, as you can see, I'm a talker and I love talking about all this stuff. And I love helping people. I love being able to offer integration calls with clients. And it's always really satisfying to have people come and share their deepest, most intimate experiences with me and to help them see where they can transform and where they can become more authentic and more free. It's just super, super satisfying. So I wouldn't change too much in that sense.
You are such a fascinating talker. I'm really very grateful. It's an honor for us to record this podcast with you. Can you tell our viewers at the end where people can find you, where they can find your books, your music?
Yeah. Well, first, just let me say thank you again for having me on. That because of the cancellation, the interview requests have been very seldom since 2001. So it's been several years now where there hasn't been a lot of opportunity for me to speak and share. And so I really appreciate, and we've been going for almost 2 hours here. I really appreciate having these long, open-ended conversations and being invited to share my experience and my perspective. And so thank you. Thank you very much. So my main hub is just martinball.net. That's like my personal webpage, and you can kind of get to any of my other stuff from there. But some of my other web pages would be for anybody looking for help with an integration call. That would be non-dual entheogenic integration.com is the website that I have for that. I also have a Patreon page, which is patreon.com/martinwball. Then you can find my books at Amazon, the Apple Bookstore, Audible. Pretty much all of my books are available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook, and I produce all my own audiobooks. And I've got a webpage for my art, which is fractalimagination.com, and you can find my music online under Martin Ball. But I always have to say that I'm not the Martin Ball whose album is Come to the Throne, that when I started releasing music online in the early 2000s, that another Martin Ball had beat me to it, and he has an album of Christian praise and gospel music, and so a lot of places online our music has been mixed up together, which is ironic and unfortunate for me. But yeah, you can find my music on Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, all those places. And then my podcast, which I've been doing for 17 years now, is the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. I produce that weekly, and you can find that wherever you find podcasts. It's out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we highly recommend your books, your podcast, your work. We will post all the links in the description, and you'll be more than welcome. We are trying to build a really huge tube here beyond the carriage as the project spread on 3 continents right now. We are planning to do a lot of panels with a lot of experts in different cultures about different very deep subjects. We are looking for some people in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, and you'll be more than welcome to speak with us maybe sometime from now, 6 months, a year. The invitation will be always available for you. And deeply thank you so much for this conversation and for your work for humanity, evolution, and consciousness. It's such a beautiful achievement, Michael.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me on, Robert. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I'll come back anytime. Would love to join in.
Yeah.